Imagine for a second that you are holding this breathless, just incredibly urgent survival guide.
Right.
But I mean, this isn't a manual for surviving a natural disaster or, navigating the wilderness.
Yeah, definitely not.
It is a document written specifically for a community of people who are actively undergoing immense psychological pressure. I mean, state-sponsored persecution and the very real daily threat of execution.
Yeah, it's literally life or death for them.
Exactly. And as you read it, you start to realize it's not just a dry historical list of facts.
Right. It's not a textbook.
It's this action-packed, deeply subversive piece of underground literature. It is meticulously designed to take an entire empire's understanding of power, of status, of what it means to be victorious, and basically flip it completely upside down.
It demands a reaction. I mean, you really cannot passively consume a text like this.
No, you can't.
By its very nature, it forces the reader to make a choice about the ground they are currently standing on.
And that is the mission of our deep dive today.
Yes, it is.
We are looking at a really comprehensive document titled Survey of Mark's Gospel by Chris R. Velasquez.
A fantastic source, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. This source provides an academic, historically grounded, and is incredibly thorough analysis of the Gospel of Mark, which is widely regarded by scholars as the earliest written gospel in the biblical canon.
Right. It sets the template.
So our goal for you today is to decode this ancient biography. We're going to uncover its surprising historical grit, break down its genius literary architecture, and explore this radically countercultural message that, honestly, still completely challenges our modern obsessions with status, wealth, and control.
Which is so relevant today. But, the first hurdle is actually the baggage we bring to texts like this.
Oh, the baggage is huge.
Yeah, because when modern audiences hear the word gospel, the immediate association is stained glass windows.
Right. Quite church pews.
Exactly. Choir music and very sanitized, polite religious assumptions.
Yeah, the Sunday school version.
Right. But to actually understand what Mark is doing, we have to basically shatter that stained glass.
I love that. Shatter the glass.
We have to strip away centuries of theological polish and just step back into the dust, the danger, and the suffocating political tension of the first century Roman Empire.
And what struck me immediately, right away in looking through these sources, is the pacing of it all.
The speed, yeah.
The sheer velocity of the writing. It doesn't read like a formal philosophical treatise by Plato or Aristotle.
No, not at all.
It reads like a high-stakes thriller. It is frantic. It's constantly on the move.
Mm-hmm.
But that urgency doesn't just come out of a vacuum, right?
Right.
It comes out of a very specific, gritty reality on the ground. So put me in the sandals of someone living in first century Galilee or Judea. We always hear about, Roman oppression. But what does that actually look like on a random Tuesday afternoon?
Well, it looks like a constant low-level hum of anxiety over your basic survival.
Just constant anxiety.
Yeah. I mean, Mark's world is entirely dominated by the geopolitical machinery of Rome. You have this massive, omnipresent hand of imperial power pressing down on the entire Mediterranean basin.
Right.
And in the specific regions Mark focuses on, which are Judea and Galilee, that power is delegated in a really messy way.
How so?
So you have Herodian client kings like Herod Antipas ruling Galilee during the time of Jesus' public ministry.
Okay, client kings.
Yeah, they're basically local puppet rulers who only maintain their wealth and power by keeping Rome happy.
So they're extracting wealth from their own people.
Exactly. And then in Judea, down south, you have direct Roman governors, the prefects.
Right.
Most notably Pontius Pilate, who governed from AD 26 to 36.
Okay, so this isn't just a political backdrop like reading the news about a distant capital city somewhere.
No, it's an active, oppressive force in the daily domestic lives of the people. It dictates taxation, military occupation, the constant threat of violence and surveillance.
So you're just constantly being watched.
Constantly. It is the absolute definition of a powder keg. And what makes the source material so compelling here is how it uses biblical archaeology to reconstruct the material dimensions of this specific world.
Yeah, the archaeology part is fascinating.
Because archaeology here isn't just about trying to, prove the text in some defensive way.
Right. It's not an apologetics tool primarily.
No, it's about recovering the physical texture of the world Jesus actually inhabited. Take the Pilate stone, for example.
Oh, yes. Let's dive into that because for a long time, there was genuine academic skepticism about whether Pontius Pilate was even a real historical figure.
Yeah, there really was.
People thought he might have just been a literary invention, just to give the story a compelling villain.
Right, because for centuries, Pilate was just a name in ancient texts. He was mentioned by the Jewish historian Josephus, the Roman historian Tacitus, and, of course, the Gospels.
But no physical proof.
Exactly. There was no physical, hard evidence of his actual administration. That completely changed in 1961.
What happened in 1961?
So, an Italian archaeological team was excavating the ancient coastal city of Caesarea Maritima.
Okay.
This was a magnificent port city built by Herod the Great, acting as the Roman administrative headquarters for the region.
So it's basically Rome away from Rome.
Exactly. The team was clearing out the ruins of an ancient theater, and they found a piece of limestone that had been repurposed.
Repurposed how?
Well, a later builder had literally just flipped the stone over and used it as a stair block for the theater.
Wait, you're kidding? Just a piece of construction rolled to them?
Just a stair. But when the archaeologists flipped it back over, they found a Latin inscription on it.
Oh, wow.
Though it was partially damaged, it clearly reads, Tiberium Pontius Pilatus Praefectus Iudae.
Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea.
Exactly. He was dedicating a building to the Emperor Tiberius. It's now sitting in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem.
That is incredible.
And that physical stone changes how we read the text, you know?
Yeah.
It reminds us that the confrontation with imperial power in Mark is not abstract, spiritualized theology.
Right.
It is embedded in a real world of Roman legal context, stone architecture, and military force.
And the archaeology doesn't just illuminate the high-level, elite political world of Pilate either.
No, it goes all the way down.
Right. It brings the day-to-day, peasant-level reality to life.
Yeah.
Like, look at Capernaum. This is the town that serves as Jesus' primary base of operations in the early chapters of Mark.
Yeah, his headquarters, basically.
When you look at the excavations there, it completely shatters the image of a majestic religious movement starting in marble halls.
Oh, absolutely. The excavations at Capernaum reveal a very modest village-scale world. We are talking about domestic structures called insulae.
Insulae. What exactly are those?
They're basically clusters of rooms built around a shared central courtyard. They housed extended families and even their animals.
Oh, so everyone's living right on top of each other.
Very close quarters. And these houses are made of unworked black basalt rock.
Basalt, so volcanic rock.
Yeah, volcanic stone, very rough, very utilitarian. They didn't even have proper roofs.
We no roofs.
Well, they used branches, mud, and straw, which actually perfectly explains the famous story in Mark chapter 2.
Oh, where the 4 men dig through the roof.
Exactly. They literally dig through a roof to lower a paralyzed man down to Jesus.
I always wondered about that, because you can't just dig through a Roman tile roof with your bare hands.
No, you'd break your fingers.
But you can certainly dig through a Galilean mud and thatch roof.
Precisely. And there are virtually no luxury imports found in these first-century layers of Capernaum.
Nothing fancy at all.
No fine Roman glass, no high-end imported pottery. It is a life constrained by hard labor and extreme economic vulnerability.
Just scraping by.
Yeah. There is even a specific domestic site within Capernaum that was heavily venerated by early Christians.
Oh, really?
Yeah, by the 5th century, a Byzantine octagonal church was built directly over this specific first-century home.
So they knew that exact spot was important.
Right. And earlier layers show plaster walls covered in ancient graffiti invoking Jesus. Now, archaeologists and historians heavily debate the exact identification, of course, but it is widely considered to be the traditional site of the Apostle Peter's house.
Peter's actual house.
Yeah. It shows the incredibly intense, localized memory of the movement's domestic origins.
Which brings us perfectly to the economy of this domestic world, because first-century Galilee was heavily dependent on the fishing economy of the Sea of Galilee. Right.
That was the main industry.
Jesus' first followers are fishermen. And I think modern readers, myself included, honestly, we imagine a couple of guys in a rowboat with a fishing pole enjoying a quiet weekend on the lake.
A nice little hobby.
Right. But the reality of first-century commercial fishing under Roman rule was a grueling, oppressive industrial syndicate.
It was a massive machine. You see, the Romans didn't collect taxes directly. They used a system called tax farming.
Tax farming, how does that work?
The empire would auction off the right to collect taxes and tolls to wealthy brokers known as the publicani. These brokers paid Rome a lump sum up front. And then their entire goal was to extract as much profit as possible from the locals to make their money back.
Plus a massive margin, I assume.
Oh, a massive margin. The Sea of Galilee was essentially a state monopoly.
So if you were a fisherman like Peter, Andrew, James, or John, you weren't just, catching fish and selling them happily at a local market.
No, you are essentially a sharecropper of the sea.
A sharecropper of the sea. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, because you have to pay a toll just for the right to cast a net.
Wow.
Then you have to pay a percentage of your catch to the tax collector. You have to pay a toll to bring the fish into port.
It never ends.
And another toll to transport them down the road. You are getting gouged at every single checkpoint.
So the people following Jesus are incredibly economically vulnerable.
They are existing at the very bottom of the social pyramid, just crushed by systemic taxation.
And hovering over all of this economic crushing is the psychological crushing of the ancient honor-shame culture.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because this wasn't a culture based on personal guilt, the way we think of it in the modern West today.
Yeah, it's very different.
It was entirely based on public perception.
Right. Honor in the first century Mediterranean world was a zero-sum game.
Meaning there's a limited supply of it.
Exactly. There was only a finite amount of honor to go around. You could only gain honor by taking it from someone else.
Like stealing their reputation.
Yeah, usually through public challenges, debates, or displays of power. Your public status, your reputation, your position in the strict hierarchy of the household, that was your actual currency.
So if you were shamed publicly...
If you were shamed publicly, you didn't just feel embarrassed. You lost economic opportunities. You lost social standing. You could ruin your entire family line.
Wow, the stakes are that high.
It was a world entirely dictated by patronage, where you survived by showing reciprocal loyalty to a wealthy benefactor in exchange for protection and favors.
Okay, wait. This doesn't make any sense to me when I look at the storyline of this text.
What do you mean?
Well, if I am a Galilean peasant, right?
Yeah.
And I'm crushed by Roman tax farmers, terrified of public shame, struggling just to survive.
Right.
I am not looking for a humble, suffering teacher. I want a general with a sword.
Exactly.
I want someone to march on Rome, burn the tax records, and restore the honor of my people by force. Why would a story about a leader who gets mocked, tortured, and executed resonate at all? I mean, in an honor-shame culture, weakness isn't just bad, it's a massive, fatal liability.
And that is the genius tension at the very heart of Mark's gospel. You've hit on the exact paradox the author is exploiting.
So he knows it sounds crazy.
He knows it's scandalous. Jesus steps into this hyper-competitive, status-obsessed world and systematically dismantles the entire cultural ladder.
Dismantles it how?
Well, in a society that worships military power and public status, Jesus publicly embraces and elevates children.
Who had zero social standing back then.
Zero. They were basically property. He elevates women, lepers, the desperately poor, and the social outcasts. And at the exact same time, he engages in public debates with the religious and political elites, the people with all the honor, and exposes their status seeking as shallow and corrupt.
So he's not just climbing the social ladder. He is looking at the ladder, recognizing it's built on exploitation, and actively kicking it over.
He is detonating the honor-shame system from the inside out.
That is so powerful.
It is. And understanding this intense, culturally rigid, and dangerous world naturally raises the question of origins.
Right, like who wrote this down?
Exactly. Who is the architect documenting these events, and what kind of audience actually needs this specific, urgent, upside-down message?
So let's talk about the architect. The text itself is technically anonymous. I mean, the author doesn't introduce himself in the first line like Paul does in his letters.
Right. There's no I, Mark, write this to you.
But the early church tradition deeply and unanimously links the text to John Mark.
John Mark is such an interesting figure. He is mentioned several times in the book of Acts and in the New Testament epistles.
He traveled with Paul, right?
He was a traveling companion of the Apostle Paul, yes. But more importantly for this text, he was a close associate of the Apostle Peter.
Okay, Peter connection.
Yeah, the 2nd century Christian writer Papias recorded a tradition stating that Mark acted as Peter's interpreter.
Interpreter.
Basically writing down accurately the things Peter remembered about the words and deeds of Jesus.
Oh, wow.
Now, modern scholars debate the exact mechanics of the authorship, of course. Some prefer to view it as a later compilation of community traditions.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the traditional attribution to John Mark compiling Peter's eyewitness accounts remains historically highly plausible.
But even if we debate the specific name holding the pen, the consensus around the dating and the location of the writing gives us massive insight into why the text feels the way it does.
Absolutely.
Because the sources place the composition likely between AD 65 and 70, and almost certainly in the city of Rome itself. That is not a calm period in history.
It is arguably one of the most terrifying periods to be a Christian in the ancient world. Because if this is written in Rome around AD 65, it is written in the immediate aftermath of the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64.
Right. Nero's fire.
Right. The Emperor Nero needed a scapegoat for the fire, and the Roman historian Tacitus tells us in horrific detail how Nero blamed the small, misunderstood Christian community.
And the descriptions of that persecution, I mean, they are stomach-turning.
They are brutal. Tacitus records that Christians were arrested, dressed in animal skins, and literally torn apart by dogs in the arena.
Unbelievable.
Others were crucified or covered in pitch and set on fire to serve as human torches for Nero's garden parties.
Just absolute horror.
This is the psychological environment of the audience. They are traumatized. They are watching their friends and family members die agonizing deaths at the hands of the state.
And
Meanwhile, across the empire in Judea, the first Jewish revolt against Rome is brewing.
which is another massive conflict.
Exactly, which will eventually culminate in the devastating Roman siege and destruction of the Jerusalem temple in AD 70.
So the audience is reading this document while the epicenter of imperial power is actively trying to exterminate them.
Yes.
And the religious center of their heritage, Jerusalem, is on the verge of total collapse. They are a community in profound crisis.
Profound crisis.
And the sources indicate this audience in Rome was predominantly made up of Gentile Christians, right? Meaning non-Jewish believers.
Yes, and we know they are a Greco-Roman Gentile audience because of the specific textual breadcrumbs Mark leaves behind for them.
Breadcrumbs like what?
Well, if you were writing a book for Jewish residents of Judea, you wouldn't need to explain basic Jewish customs.
Because they'd already know them.
Exactly. But in Mark chapter 7, the author completely pauses the narrative to explain the paradosis.
The tradition of the elders.
Right. Detailing exactly how the Pharisees ceremonially washed their hands in their vessels before eating.
Oh, I see.
A Jewish audience would find that really patronizing, but a Gentile audience in Rome absolutely needed that anthropological footnote to understand the conflict happening in the story.
That makes total sense. Mark also constantly translates Aramaic terms into Greek for his readers.
Yes, he does.
Because Aramaic was the common daily language of first-century Galilee and Judea. But what I find so fascinating is how he translates them.
How so?
He doesn't just give the Greek equivalent and move on. He phonetically spells out the original Aramaic words and then provides the translation.
This is one of the most profound psychological touches in the entire gospel.
Unpack that for us. Why is preserving the Aramaic so powerful for a traumatized audience?
Well, think about the mindset of a Roman Christian hiding in a house church in AD 65.
Yeah.
The empire is telling you that your faith is a superstitious myth.
Right.
The state is executing your leaders. You might be doubting everything.
Of course you would be.
When Mark records the story of Jesus raising a dead little girl, he doesn't just say, Jesus told her to get up. He records the exact localized syllables Jesus spoke in that room.
Talitha cum.
Talitha cum. He spells it out, then translates it. Little girl, I say to you, arise. Later, when healing a deaf man, he preserves the agonizing groan and the command. Ephatha, be opened.
It's acting as a linguistic tether.
Exactly. It provides an auditory connection to the historical Jesus. Mark is telling this abused Greek-speaking minority in Rome, this isn't a myth, this isn't a philosophical fable. I'm giving you the exact sounds that came out of the Messiah's mouth in the dirt of Galilee.
Grounding it in reality.
It grounds the divine authority of Jesus in gritty, undeniable historical reality.
And that brings us back to the sheer speed of the text, because Mark announces his project right in verse 1 with a very specific, highly charged Greek word.
Euangelion.
Euangelion. Now, we usually translate that into English as gospel or good news, but in the first century Roman world, Euangelion wasn't a religious word, was it?
Not at all. It was a piece of imperial political propaganda.
Really?
Yeah, Euangelion was the technical term for a royal announcement. In 9 BC, there was a famous inscription made in the city of Priene celebrating the birth of Emperor Augustus. The inscription literally says that the birth of the god Augustus was the beginning of the Euangelion, the good news for the world. Oh, wow. When an emperor won a military victory or ascended to the throne, heralds would run through the streets shouting the Euangelion.
So Mark takes the emperor's intellectual property and completely hijacks it.
He steals it.
The very first line of his book is basically an act of political treason.
It absolutely is.
He is saying, You want to hear the real Evangelion. It's not coming from Caesar's palace. It's coming from a carpenter in Galilee.
Yeah.
Here is the true king.
Right.
And once he makes that announcement, he hits the accelerator and never lets up. He drives the narrative forward with his favorite word.
Euthes.
Euthes.
Meaning immediately or straight away. He uses it dozens of times. Jesus is baptized, and immediately the Spirit drives him into the wilderness.
Right.
He calls the disciples, and immediately they leave their nets.
You know, the best analogy I can come up with is the shaky cam technique in modern action movies.
Oh, it's good.
Like, think of the Jason Bourne films.
Yeah.
The camera is always moving, close up, almost aggressively kinetic. The director doesn't let you sit back and relax for a second. Mark is the literary equivalent of the shaky cam.
That's exactly what it feels like.
He grabs you by the collar and yanks you from scene to scene. There is no time for long, leisurely philosophical monologues. It forces you to physically feel the urgency of the kingdom of God breaking into the present moment.
But that visceral, relentless quality is not a sign of a crude or uneducated writer, as some early critics actually assumed.
Right, they thought he was just a bad writer.
Yeah, but it's a deliberate, highly sophisticated architectural choice. Mark is a master literary architect, and the source material outlines a very precise, brilliant three-act structure holding all this chaos together.
Wait, so if the pacing is chaotic, how does he keep the story from just disintegrating into noise? What is the blueprint?
The blueprint is built around geography and revelation.
Okay, geography.
Yeah. Act 1 covers chapter 1 through chapter 8, verse 26. This is the Galilean ministry. Jesus is operating primarily in the north, around the Sea of Galilee.
Right, near Capernaum.
And the absolute dominant theme of Act 1 is authority. The Greek word is exousia.
How is exousia different from just regular power?
Well, regular power is just the ability to force someone to do something, right?
Like military might.
Right. Exousia is intrinsic, unquestionable authority. In the ancient world, rabbis taught by citing previous rabbis to build their credibility.
Rabbi so-and-so says this.
Right. Rabbi Hill says this, but Rabbi Shammai says that. Jesus steps into the synagogue and teaches with exousia. He doesn't quote anyone. He just declares reality.
He speaks for himself.
Mark shows Jesus establishing his jurisdiction over every domain that torments humanity. He has exousia over the demonic realm, casting out unclean spirits. He has exousia over disease, curing leprosy and paralysis.
Wow.
He even has exousia over the chaos of nature, calming a deadly storm with a single command.
He is doing things that, according to the Hebrew scriptures, only the Creator God should be able to do.
Exactly.
But here's the catch, and this is where the motif of misunderstanding comes in.
Yeah, the blindness.
Jesus is doing these incredibly public, undeniable, jaw-dropping miracles, but nobody in the story seems to actually understand what is happening.
Nobody.
The religious leaders think he is possessed by Satan. His own family thinks he has lost his mind. And even his closest friends, the disciples, are constantly terrified and confused. Why is everyone so blind?
Because Mark uses this blindness to define the nature of sin.
Oh, interesting.
In this gospel, sin is not simply a list of moral infractions. It isn't just breaking a rule. It is an epistemic distortion.
Epistemic,
Yeah.
meaning a failure in how a person actually processes knowledge and perceives reality.
Yeah.
Like a corrupted hard drive trying to read a clean file.
A corrupted operating system. Exactly. Human beings, in Mark's narrative, look at Jesus feeding thousands of people with a few loaves of bread, and their conclusion isn't, "Behold the Lord of creation providing manna in the wilderness."
Which is what it's supposed to mean.
Right. Their conclusion is utter confusion. Their mental hardware cannot process the software of the kingdom of God because their entire reality is built on the Roman matrix of power, honor, and physical dominance. A suffering, serving king does not compute.
And what makes it even wilder is that Jesus actively seems to encourage this confusion at times.
He does.
This leads us to one of the most famous, debated, and honestly baffling literary devices in the entire book, the Messianic secret.
Yes.
We see this pattern repeatedly in Act 1.
Yeah.
Jesus performs a miracle, he heals a leper, or he casts out a shrieking demon who correctly identifies him as the Holy One of God.
Right.
And the very next thing Jesus does is explicitly, strictly command them to shut up about it.
Shh, tell no one.
He gags the demons. He tells the healed people to tell no one. If the entire goal of a Evangelion is to announce a new kingdom, why is the king constantly telling his PR department to stand down?
It's a brilliant question, and it was a major puzzle for early biblical scholars. In the early 20th century, a scholar named William Reed proposed that Jesus never actually claimed to be the Messiah.
Wait, what?
Yeah, he thought Mark just invented the secret to explain why no one knew about it during Jesus' lifetime.
Oh, like a cover-up.
Exactly. But modern expert consensus, heavily supported by our source material, rejects that entirely. The secrecy is not a historical cover-up. It is a vital narrative and theological strategy by Jesus himself.
Because the title of Messiah was just too dangerous.
Because the word Christos, the Greek translation of Messiah, meaning the anointed one, was heavily, dangerously loaded with triumphalist baggage.
Triumphalist meaning what exactly to a first-century Jew?
It meant a military conqueror. If you walk into a village in Judea in AD 30 and announce, "I am the Messiah," the people immediately access a very specific cultural file.
The military file.
They think, the new King David, the guy who's going to raise an army, pick up a sword, slaughter the Roman garrisons, and put Israel back on top of the geopolitical food chain. The expectation was entirely political and violent.
So if Jesus publicly embraces that title on day one, the crowds will completely misunderstand his mission. They will try to crown him as a military warlord, which would instantly bring the wrath of the Roman legions down on them, completely derailing what he actually came to do.
Exactly.
He has to keep the title under wraps until he can successfully redefine what the title actually means.
You can't use a word if the dictionary definition is wrong. You have to write a new dictionary first.
That is a great way to put it.
And this secrecy builds massive, almost unbearable narrative tension. As a reader, you are watching this pressure cooker build. You know exactly who Jesus is. Mark told you in the very first sentence.
Right. The reader is in on the secret.
The demons know who he is, but none of the human characters in the story know. You are just waiting for the explosion, waiting for someone to finally figure it out and say it out loud.
And that explosion finally happens, kicking off Act 2. This is the watershed moment of the entire gospel.
The turning point.
We move into chapters 8 through 10, and Jesus chooses a very specific, highly provocative location to force this conversation, Caesarea Philippi.
The geography here is critical. Caesarea Philippi is situated in the far northern region at the base of Mount Hermon near the Banias Spring.
Which is a beautiful area, right?
Beautiful, yes, and it's one of the main sources of the Jordan River. But it is a politically and religiously charged landscape.
Now so.
It was a major center of paganism. There was a massive, sheer rock cliff face there with niches carved into it, housing statues for the Greek god Pan.
The god of the wilds.
The god of the wild, of shepherds, of panic. That's why the area was called Panias. Furthermore, Herod the Great had built a gleaming white marble temple right there dedicated to the worship of Caesar Augustus.
So Jesus takes his 12 disciples to the absolute epicenter of worldly power and pluralism.
Yes.
He takes them to a place dominated by a massive rock face, dedicated to pagan gods and the imperial cult. And against that specific backdrop, he asks them the ultimate exam question. Who do people say I am?
Right.
They give some wrong answers. John the Baptist, Elijah, a prophet. And he narrows it down. But who do you say I am?
And this is where Peter steps up. In Mark 8:9, Peter finally voices the confession the reader has been waiting for. You are the Christ, the Christos, the Messiah.
He gets the answer right. The tension breaks.
He gets the vocabulary word right, but he gets the dictionary definition completely disastrously wrong.
Oh, right.
Because the very moment Peter gets the title right, Jesus introduces a massive, shocking reversal. He accepts the role, but he immediately shifts the terminology.
He changes the title.
He stops using the word Messiah, and he starts using his preferred self-designation. Huios tu anthropo, the Son of Man.
And to a modern ear, Son of Man sounds like a humble brag.
Right.
It sounds like Jesus is just saying, I'm a normal human guy, but that's not what it meant to them, was it?
Not at all. It links directly back to the apocalyptic visions in the book of Daniel, specifically Daniel chapter 7.
Okay, Daniel 7.
In that vision, the Son of Man is a cosmic heavenly figure who rides on the clouds and is given everlasting dominion, glory, and a kingdom by God himself, superseding all the beastly empires of the earth. So it is a massive, divine claim of authority.
But Jesus immediately pairs this cosmic title with something totally unthinkable.
Right. Mark 8:31. Jesus plainly predicts that the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, be killed, and after 3 days rise again.
And Peter completely loses his mind.
He freaks out.
The text says Peter actually takes Jesus aside and rebukes him. He rebukes the Messiah. And the Greek word used for rebuke here is the exact same word Jesus uses to gag demons, isn't it?
Yes, exactly, because Peter's mental hard drive is crashing. He wants the crown, but he absolutely refuses the cross.
Right.
He wants the glory, the power, the defeat of the Romans. The idea of a suffering, dying Son of Man was an oxymoron. It was a contradiction in terms. In Peter's mind, a dead Messiah is a failed Messiah.
So Jesus rebukes Peter right back in front of everyone. Get behind me, Satan.
Which is intense.
Very intense. He is essentially telling Peter, you are acting as an adversary. Your mind is set on human things, on the matrix of this world's power structures, on honor and dominance, not on the things of God.
Yep.
And this confrontation kicks off a whole section of teaching in Act 2 that completely redefines the cost of leadership and the nature of power.
This is the theological core of the gospel. Mark 10.45 is widely considered the programmatic verse, the thesis statement of the entire book.
What does it say?
Jesus says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
I want to drill down into the context of that verse, because I try to put myself in the disciples' sandals here, and their behavior is astonishing.
It really is embarrassing.
Jesus has just predicted his torture and death for the 3rd time. And immediately after, James and John, 2 of his inner circle, come up to him and literally ask for seats of honor.
Unbelievable timing.
Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory. It's like watching 2 corporate executives walk into the CEO's office right after he announces the company is facing ruin to negotiate for the titles of Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer.
They're negotiating for the corner offices. In ancient royal courts, the seats at the right and left hand of the king were reserved for the vizier and the supreme military commander.
The power players.
The people who control the money and the army. James and John look at Jesus, they hear kingdom, and they think he's about to march into Jerusalem, stage a violent coup, and overthrow the government.
You want in on the ground floor.
They want their equity vested before the IPO. It is breathtaking arrogance, and it proves they still do not understand the mechanism of the kingdom.
So Jesus has to look at these power-hungry disciples and say, you don't know what you are asking. The cup I am going to drink is suffering. The only throne I am getting is a Roman execution stake. And if you want to be near me in my glory, that is exactly where you are going to.
Yeah.
How does this redefine the entire concept of power for the listener, both then and now?
Well, think back to the patronal system we discussed earlier. The Roman system of wealthy benefactors, strict hierarchies, honor, and shame.
Right.
Jesus looks at his disciples and says, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them, but it is not so among you."
Not so among you.
He is actively dismantling the hierarchy. True greatness is redefined as servanthood. True authority is not exercised in domination. It is exercised in sacrifice.
Wow.
Mark is presenting a very high Christology, meaning he views Jesus as fully divine, but it is wrapped in an inescapable paradox. Divine glory is hidden in suffering.
It's not just a clever public relations strategy. It's a total inversion of reality. The way up is down. The leader is the slave of all.
Exactly. And once this mission is redefined, even though the disciples are still thoroughly confused, blinded by their ambition, and Fear Act 3 begins,
The final act.
the tension has peaked, and now the pressure cooker has to release. Jesus turns his face south toward Jerusalem. He is heading to the ultimate center of Jewish political, religious, and economic life to force a final, fatal confrontation.
Collision course. Chapters 11 through 16. The narrative narrows, the days slow down, but the intensity skyrockets.
Oh, it really does.
Jesus enters Jerusalem, and from the very start of chapter 11, it is deliberate, highly provocative street theater.
The triumphal entry.
The triumphal entry. He rides down the Mount of Olives on a borrowed donkey. It is a royal arrival, intentionally fulfilling the ancient prophecy of Zechariah 9, but it is executed in absolute, glaring humility.
It is a counter-triumph. If you live in Rome, you know what a military triumph looks like.
What does that look like?
A victorious Roman general rides into the city in a massive gilded chariot drawn by 4 white horses, surrounded by the spoils of war, captive slaves, and his blood-soaked army, heading up to the temple of Jupiter to offer sacrifices.
And Jesus rides in on a beast of burden, surrounded by unarmed peasants waving palm branches. He is openly mocking the pomp, circumstance, and violence of imperial power.
It's a prophetic sign act, and it immediately escalates. He rides into the city, goes straight into the temple complex, looks around, leaves for the night, and comes back the next day for the famous cleansing of the temple.
Flipping the tables.
He overturns the tables of the money changers and the seats of those selling pigeons.
Now, we need to clarify the mechanics of the temple economy here, because people often read this as Jesus just losing his temper because someone was selling overpriced souvenirs in a holy place.
Right, like a bad gift shop.
Yeah, exactly. But it's so much deeper than that.
Oh, way deeper. The Jerusalem temple was not just a large church. It was the absolute center of the national economy. It was Wall Street, the Vatican, and the Supreme Court all rolled into one massive architectural complex covering 35 acres.
35 acres.
Huge. And during the Passover festival, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims flooded the city. To pay the mandatory annual temple tax, you couldn't use Roman coins with the emperor's face on them. That was considered idolatrous.
Right, no graven images.
You had to exchange your money for Tyrian shekels, which had a very high silver purity. The money changers charged an exorbitant premium for this exchange.
A huge markup.
Furthermore, you had to buy unblemished animals for sacrifice, which were monopolized by the elite priestly families, specifically the family of the high priest Annas.
It was a massive racket exploiting the poorest pilgrims who had traveled miles just to worship God.
Precisely. So when Jesus physically disrupts this commerce, he isn't throwing a tantrum. He is enacting a prophetic judgment.
Right.
By stopping the flow of sacrifices and money, he is symbolically destroying the temple. He is quoting Jeremiah, calling it a den of robbers, which doesn't just mean a place where thieves steal, but a safe house where bandits retreat to hide after they have committed their crimes.
Wow.
He is indicting the religious elite for using the house of God as cover for systemic economic exploitation.
Which naturally leads right into chapter 13, the Olivet Discourse. Jesus leaves the temple, sits on the Mount of Olives looking back at these massive, beautiful stones, and predicts the literal physical destruction of the entire complex.
Yeah, he says, not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down.
And think about the timeline we established earlier. The audience in Rome reading this document in AD 65 to 70 is either watching this happen in real time, or they are about to watch it happen as the Roman legions under the General Titus march on Jerusalem to crush the Jewish revolt.
The eschatological warning in Mark 13 carries immense emotional weight. It is a call for disciples to endure amid massive political upheaval, wars, rumors of wars, and cosmic instability.
Right.
Jesus is telling them, the structures of this world, even the ones that look permanent, religious, and indestructible, are going to collapse. Do not be deceived by false messiahs who promise military victory. Stay awake. Remain faithful in the chaos.
It is a theology of endurance for a world on fire. And then the passion narrative truly begins. The narrative pacing shifts. The frantic shaky cam slows down to a suffocating, agonizing crawl.
It really drags you through it.
We reach Gethsemane in chapter 14. Jesus is praying in the garden, overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And here, Mark preserves another one of those profound Aramaic words.
Abba, Father.
It highlights this incredible, intimate obedience in the face of terror. Jesus says, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will.
The contrast in this scene is staggering.
It is.
Jesus is wide awake, sweating in agony, actively embracing the horror of the cross out of obedience. And his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, the very men who boasted they could drink the cup he drinks, are literally asleep on the job.
They can't even stay awake for an hour.
This begins the tragic literary movement of the final chapters, the total isolation of the Messiah.
I noticed this pattern so clearly reading through the source material. Mark systematically, methodically strips away every single layer of Jesus' support.
Every single one.
Early in the book, the massive crowds are everywhere. He can't even enter a town without being mobbed. By Act 3, the crowds fade away or are manipulated by the priests into screaming for his crucifixion.
Right.
The religious leaders actively plot to execute him. Judas, one of his own hand-picked 12, betrays him with a kiss for money. Peter, the guy who made the great confession at Caesarea Philippi, denies even knowing him to a servant girl in a courtyard to save his own skin.
Just absolute failure.
And the rest of the disciples completely abandon him and flee into the dark. By the time Jesus faces Pilate for his trial, he is completely, utterly isolated. The stripping away is total.
It is absolute terrifying abandonment. Jesus faces the imperial machinery of Rome completely alone. And this brings us to the climax of the gospel, the crucifixion in chapter 15. Mark doesn't focus on the physical gore of the crucifixion. He focuses on the shame, the mockery, and the cosmic darkness. The depths of this suffering are expressed in that haunting Aramaic cry from the cross at the 9th hour, Elushi, Elushi, lema sabachthani.
My God, why have you forsaken me?
Exactly. It is a direct quote from the opening line of Psalm 22. It is the ultimate expression of the suffering servant king. The cross represents the absolute depth of messianic suffering and the fulfillment of the scriptures. He is dying in the place of the many.
And here is the supreme, masterful irony of Mark's gospel. Jesus breathes his last, and two things happen immediately.
Right.
First, the veil of the temple in Jerusalem is torn in two from top to bottom, symbolizing that the old corrupt system is judged and access to the presence of God is now open through the death of Jesus.
Yes.
Second, the messianic secret is finally permanently broken. But the verbal unveiling comes from the most unlikely person imaginable.
A Roman centurion.
Yes, a Gentile, an agent of state-sponsored violence.
Right.
An instrument of the very empire that just unjustly executed him. A man whose daily professional job involves overseeing the torture and execution of state enemies. He stands facing Jesus, watches the way he breathes his last, and he says in Mark 15:39 then that truly this man was the Son of God. Quios to Theo.
The irony is breathtaking. Think about it. The religious insiders, the Pharisees, the scribes, the chief priests, the people who had the scriptures memorized, they completely missed it.
And they missed it entirely.
The closest disciples, Peter, James, John, the ones who saw the miracles and walked with him for years, they completely missed it and ran away.
Yeah.
It takes a pagan soldier standing in the dirt at the foot of a Roman execution rack, looking at a mutilated, dead Jewish peasant to finally see Jesus' true identity.
This encapsulates Mark's entire theological point, doesn't it?
It does. The cross is the revelation. You cannot understand who Jesus is by looking at his miracles alone. You cannot understand him by looking at his power over storms. You can only truly understand him when you see him giving his life as a ransom for his enemies. The glory of God is not revealed in domination. It is revealed in self-giving, sacrificial love.
Okay, so the king is dead. He is taken down and buried in a rock-hewn tomb. The Sabbath passes. And this brings us to chapter 16. The women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, go to the tomb very early on the first day of the week to anoint his body.
Right.
They find the massive stone already rolled away. They enter the tomb, and instead of a body, they find a young man in a white robe. He gives them the ultimate royal announcement, the true euangelion. Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him.
The true good news.
And then he commissions them to go tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus is going ahead of them to Galilee. And then we hit what has to be the most debated ending in all of ancient literature.
Mark chapter 16, verse 8. The text simply says, "And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid."
And scene. Cut to black. Roll the credits. Wait, what? They said nothing to anyone. They fled in terror. That is how the earliest, most urgent, fast-paced gospel ends, on a massive cliffhanger of fear and silence.
It is incredibly abrupt. It feels like hitting a brick wall at 60 miles an hour.
It really does.
Now, if you open a modern printed Bible, you will likely see verses 9 through 20 included, often with a footnote or set off in brackets.
Right.
This is known as the longer ending, where Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene, then to 2 disciples walking in the country, and finally commissions the 11 disciples to preach the gospel to the whole creation.
But our source material dives deep into the textual criticism and the original language manuscripts regarding this ending. Explain how the manuscript evidence actually works here.
Well, textual criticism is the science of analyzing ancient manuscripts to reconstruct the original text as closely as possible. And when scholars look at the earliest, most reliable, available evidence, the longer ending simply isn't there.
It's just missing.
It's missing. We have a 3rd century papyrus fragment known as P45, which is a very early witness to Mark's text, and it points to an early conclusion. But the most glaring evidence comes from the magnificent 4th century complete Greek Bibles. specifically Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus.
Codex Sinaiticus is fascinating. It was discovered in the 19th century at St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai, right?
Yes, by a scholar named Konstantin von Tischendorf. It is written on expensive animal skin vellum, with 4 columns to a page. And when you turn to the end of Mark and Codex Sinaiticus, it stops dead at verse 8 with the words "Ephobountagar," for they were afraid.
And then what?
And then the rest of the column is completely blank.
Wow.
In ancient manuscript production, vellum was incredibly expensive. You did not leave blank space unless you were absolutely certain the book was finished.
So the expert consensus is that the longer ending, verses 9 through 20, is a later addition by someone else.
Widely considered to be a later edition, yes. Early scribes reading Mark's abrupt ending were likely just as unsettled as we are.
I can imagine.
It feels incomplete, maybe even disrespectful to end on a note of human failure. So over time, later copyists likely smoothed over the uncomfortable cliffhanger by summarizing the resurrection appearances found in the other Gospels, like Matthew, Luke, and John, to give the book a more traditional, comforting conclusion.
But if we assume the original author, John Mark, intentionally stopped his pen at verse 8, that is a massive, deliberate literary choice. He didn't run out of ink. The scroll didn't tear off. He chose to end it there. We will come back to exactly why that matters so much in a minute. But first, let's pull the lens back.
Okay.
We need to talk about what this entire deep dive means for us today. The source material outlines the modern application and relevance of Mark's gospel. And honestly, reading it with this fresh perspective, it feels more relevant now than it ever has. Mark explicitly, aggressively refuses to idolize power, image, celebrity, and control.
Think about the mechanics of the world we live in right now. It is completely driven by performative identity.
Oh, completely.
Everyone is trying to build a personal brand. We are constantly seeking status, seeking likes, seeking influence, seeking the right connections. We are terrified of being shamed or canceled in the digital public square.
We are basically living in a high-speed digital version of the first century Mediterranean honor-shame culture, the zero-sum game of clout chasing.
Precisely. The technology has changed, but the human hardware is exactly the same. And into this exhausting world of constant status anxiety, Mark offers a devastating, liberating counterstory.
What's a counterstory?
He says that the true kingdom of God is not built by coercion, by clever PR campaigns, by accumulating wealth, or by dominating your political enemies. The way up is down, the first will be last, the greatest among you must be the servant of all.
I was thinking about the boardroom analogy earlier. If Mark's gospel were published today as a corporate leadership book, it would be an absolute failure on Wall Street.
They'd laugh you out of the room.
It would be laughed out of a Silicon Valley pitch meeting. The steps to success are completely backward. It essentially says, Step 1, abandon your ambition for status and public honor. Step 2, actively serve the people at the bottom of society who can offer you absolutely nothing in return. Step 3, prepare to suffer deeply, lose your reputation, and possibly your life for doing this.
It is the ultimate anti-influencer manual. It dismantles the ego.
Yes. Yet somehow, this bizarre upside-down blueprint is the foundation for the most enduring, transformative movement in human history.
Because it offers what the source material beautifully calls a theology of courage without triumphalism.
That is a vital phrase to unpack.
A theology of courage without triumphalism means you can have profound hope, you can have ultimate confidence in the victory of the resurrection, but it does not mean you get to conquer your enemies with force in the present moment.
Right.
It does not mean you get to escape suffering, sickness, or injustice. It means that God is intimately present with you in the middle of the suffering, just as he was with Jesus hanging on the cross.
It completely redefines what a successful, meaningful human life actually looks like.
It demands that we pause and ask ourselves, are we actually following the Jesus of Mark's gospel, the suffering servant who washes feet and dies for his enemies? Or are we, like Peter in chapter 8, constantly trying to rebuke Jesus because we would rather have a triumphant, aggressive conqueror who validates our own desire for power, comfort, and control?
Oof, that is a heavy, necessary question. Really forces you to look in the mirror. Okay, let's bring this all together. We have gone on an incredible, expansive journey today. We started in the dust and grit of first-century Capernaum, exploring the economic crushing of Roman tax farming and the oppressive weight of the honor-shame culture. We saw fishermen called away from their nets to follow a mysterious teacher who operated with absolute, unquestionable exousia over the natural and supernatural world.
We moved into the politically charged pagan shadow of Caesarea Philippi, where the entire cultural concept of the Messiah was subversively redefined from a violent military conqueror to a suffering servant who gives his life as a ransom.
We marched down into Jerusalem, witnessing the prophetic judgment of a corrupt, monopolized temple system. We watched the painful, systematic stripping away of every layer of Jesus' support in Gethsemane, culminating in the dark, brutal, isolating reality of the Roman cross.
Where, in the ultimate stroke of irony, a Roman soldier trained in state violence became the very first human being to truly see and confess the Son of God.
And finally, we arrived at an empty tomb. Which brings us back to that jarring cliffhanger ending, Mark 16, verse 8. The women flee in terror and astonishment, saying nothing to anyone. Why? Why would John Mark, write into a persecuted, terrified community in Rome, intentionally end his fast-paced, urgent, shaky cam narrative with fear and silence?
Because by leaving the story unresolved on the page, Mark deliberately forces a narrative off the page.
Ah, I see.
He refuses to give you a neat, tidy, tied up with a bow conclusion where everyone acts bravely and lives happily ever after. The ending is essentially an open door.
It's like he drops the camera right in your lap. At the very beginning of this deep dive, we talked about Mark being a survival guide for people drowning in the muddy waters of persecution and pressure. It is not a textbook you just read and put on a shelf. It is an active challenge. By suddenly stopping the story with the failure of the first witnesses, Mark is turning directly to you, the listener.
Yes.
He is saying, now you know the messianic secret. You know who the suffering king is. You know exactly what the cross means, and you know the tomb is empty. But the people in the story failed to speak. So what are you going to do about it?
It is the ultimate literary provocation. The story requires you to write the next sentence with your life. Will you be like the religious elites and reject him? Will you be like Peter and demand a different kind of king? Will you be like the women at the tomb, running away in fear and silence when the reality of the resurrection gets too overwhelming and the cost becomes too real?
Or will you take up your cross, step out into the gritty reality of a world absolutely obsessed with status and power, and follow the servant king into the unknown?